Welcome to the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and today we look at the latest policy idea from the UK's Labour Party.
We'll reduce the average full-time working week to 32 hours within the next decade.
It's been branded as too radical by many, but has John McDonnell got a point?
Look at the history of this. In the 1860s, people worked a 65-hour week. And thanks to past Labour governments, but actually mainly thanks to the trade union movement, by the 1970s, the average working week had been reduced to 43 hours. As society got richer, we could spend fewer hours at work. But in recent decades, progress has stalled. People in our country work some of the longest hours in Europe. And since the 1980s, the link between increasing productivity and expanded free time has been broken. It's time to put that right.
But does it make sense? The pros and cons of a 4-day working week. This week on the Debunking Economics podcast. Yeah, it's very easy, isn't it, to dismiss this idea as just being too radical. If you heard that announcement at all, because of course everything's been lost in the Brexit noise, but that was the UK Labour Party conference in Brighton this year. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell outlining a slew of policy ideas, including this one, reducing working hours, so that within the next decade we'll be working a maximum of 32 hours a week with no loss of pay. And you can imagine how that's gone down with Sun readers, for example. Their comments: Labour are desperate. Labour are wrecking the economy, and this is the norm. They do it every time they get in power. Nobody who listens to this fool's speech this morning could possibly contemplate voting Labour. As a serious political party, they're finished. And companies would have to pay staff more to make up the difference and hire more staff to cover the extra day off. To afford this, companies would have to charge more, so we'd all be paying more for everything, meaning we'll have to work extra to afford it. Now, that's the Sun read. At least one had a go at trying to argue against it, but rather than just the rhetoric. But I spoke to some of my friends on this as well, Steve, and they don't get it either. Mind you, I do live in Surrey, so not exactly the hiding place for a secret Trotskyite cabal, but their view, Steve, and I think this is quite common, a bit like that Sun read. If you've got a 4-day week with no loss in wages, then that's going to add to the cost for companies. That's going to make them less competitive internationally. So that's going to be bad for Britain, unless everyone everywhere else in the world does the same thing.
Yeah, this is one of the things, when you see it happening over time, you sort of wonder, have people lost sight of what is supposed to happen with a well-functioning social system over time? And one of those things is we should all be feeling we're getting wealthier. And one element of we're being wealthier is getting more output for less time. And then you get a choice. What do you want? More? Do you want more free time or more money? And at some point, as Keynes was saying back when he wrote the, I think, Economic Prospects for Our Children. I forget that's not quite the right title, but that's the overall intent.
It's a good one. I'm going to write that book now. But I mean, yeah, it all gets down to productivity, doesn't it? I mean, we're not seeing that productivity improvement.
He imagined a 15-hour week, by pretty much when you and I are alive now. And it hasn't quite worked out that way. So that was Keynes's expectation over time. And the question is, what's gone wrong with it? And why instead of getting that, we're now getting at the other extreme. This is happening all around the world. People in developed countries are being told, we've got to push your pension age back. So it was going to be pension at 60. And now it's 65, and then it's going to be 67, and finally it's 70, meaning you don't get guaranteed state support for yourself until you're 70 years old. And isn't that a good use of state resources? No, it bloody well isn't, because, again, if you look at people working in manual labour, and I've got my own specific experience of this right now. If I was a manual worker, I would be having a bloody hard time right now because I'm getting arthritis in my hands. I cannot form a fist with my right hand. Haven't been able to for about 6 years. I'm starting to lose the same in my left hand, which is the one I actually use, thank God, for tennis and important activities like that. But a manual worker, that'd be it. They can't do the work anymore.
Yeah. So the state will still pay. They'll have to pay. They have to pay them unemployment benefit rather than
what they get is where they're discussing things like New Start in Australia, which people up to the age of 65 have been put on what's called New Start, where they've got to be writing, it's penalising them for it. So they've got to be writing multiple job applications per week for jobs that simply don't exist in proportion to the number of old people looking for them. They'll get rejected on an ageist basis, even though they're told it isn't ageist, and they should be doing the work in the first bloody place because they've got, I literally know one of my family members has one leg. And until he turned 65, was being pushed onto New Start because they saw him as work capable. If a 64-year-old man on one leg starts walking towards you saying he wants a job in your factory, you're going to find some polite reason to deny him the position. Yeah. So it's insane.
So it is insane, isn't it, that we are sort of on the one side saying, we're going to get people working longer, and longer in terms of the week, but also longer in terms of their lifetime.
Yeah. So what's gone?
And yet we want to do it the other way around. So what's gone wrong? Yeah. And it does get down to that question of productivity, doesn't it? Because the reason that was given by John McDonnell was, well, if you look at the French are more productive in the UK, so they actually do in 4 days what it takes the UK to do in 5. Australia, by the way, is slightly less productive, I think, than the UK. So, boosting productivity is part of the reasoning. And in fact, some people say, well, if I only work 4 days rather than 5, I probably would achieve the same.
Well, this is where our definition of productivity brings us astray. And this comes back to my work on energy now, because I think it's ridiculous to talk about labour productivity. Okay, I think it's a ridiculous concept, because how much more productive are you than a Roman slave? Now, if I tied you to a wall and said, okay, chop down all the trees you can reach with your axe, I reckon the Roman slave would outdo you.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of calorie capacity, and not to mention motivation, there's been no change in the physical productivity of unskilled labour since the year dot, because there's a fundamental energetic limit to humans. We, by the looks of it, we can sustain something equivalent to about 90 watts of energy, which is slightly less than the energy of an old incandescent light bulb. We can manage that for 6 to 10 hours, and that's it. That exhausts our energy capacity, and that hasn't changed over time.
So the argument so far basically is that we are not going to increase productivity if we keep on relying on more and more on labour, because, as Steve says, there's only so much energy that can be output from an individual human being. So a 4-day week and more automation may be a good thing if we want to increase productivity. That is just the first part of this discussion. There is so much more. If you want to hear it in full, then you need to subscribe at debunkingeconomics.com or become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen. You get access to this and all the other podcasts in this series. I'm Phil Dobbie. We'll see you back here again soon. Thanks for listening.